Of course, in the pseudo-formulas of astronomers, gravitation as a fixed quantity is essential. Accept that gravitation is a variable force, and astronomers deflate, with a perceptible hissing sound, into the punctured condition of economists, biologists, meteorologists, and all the others of the humbler divinities who can admittedly offer only insecure approximations. We refer all who would not like to hear the hiss of escaping arrogance to Herbert Spencer's chapters upon the rhythm of all phenomena. If everything else, light from the stars, heat from the sun, the winds and the tides, forms and colors and sizes of animals, demands and supplies and prices, political opinions and chemic reactions, and religious doctrines and magnetic intensities, and the ticking of clocks, and arrival and departure of the seasons, if everything else is variable, we accept that the notion of gravitation as fixed and formulable is only another attempted positivism, doomed, like all other illusions of realness, in quasi-existence. So it is intermediatism to accept that, though gravitation may approximate higher to invariability than do the winds, for instance, it must be somewhere between the absolutes of stability and instability. Here, then, we are not much impressed with the opposition of physicists and astronomers, fearing a little mournfully that their language is of expiring sibilations. So then the fields of ice in the sky, and that, though usually so far away as to be mere blurs, at times they come close enough to be seen in detail. For description of what I call a blur, see Popular Science News, February 1884. Sky, in general, unusually clear, but near the sun, a white, slightly curdled haze, which was dazzlingly bright. We accept that sometimes fields of ice pass between the sun and the earth, that many strata of ice, or very thick fields of ice, or superimposed fields, would obscure the sun, that there have been occasions when the sun was eclipsed by fields of ice. Flammarion, The Atmosphere, page 394. That a profound darkness came upon the city of Brussels, June 18, 1839. There fell flat pieces of ice an inch long. Intense darkness at Aitkin, Minnesota, April 2nd, 1889. Sand and solid chunks of ice reported to have fallen. Science, April 19th, 1889. In Simon's Meteorological Magazine, 32-172, are outlined rough-edged but smooth-surfaced pieces of ice that fell at Manassas, Virginia, August 10, 1897. They look as much like the roughly broken fragments of a smooth sheet of ice as ever have roughly broken fragments of a smooth sheet of ice looked. About 2 inches across and 1 inch thick. In Cosmos 3-116, it is said that at Rouen, July 5th, 1853, fell irregular shaped pieces of ice about the size of a hand, described as looking as if all had been broken from one enormous block of ice. That, I think, was an aerial iceberg. In the awful density, or almost absolute stupidity, of the 19th century, it never occurred to anybody to look for traces of polar bears or of seals upon these fragments. Of course, seeing what we want to see, having been able to gather these data only because they are in agreement with notions formed in advance, we are not so respectful to our own notions as to a similar impression forced upon an observer who had no theory or acceptance to support. In general, our prejudices see and our prejudices investigate, but this should not be taken as an absolute. Monthly Weather Review, July 1894. That, from the Weather Bureau of Portland, Oregon, a tornado of June 3, 1894 was reported. Fragments of ice fell from the sky. They averaged 3 to 4 inches square and about an inch thick. In length and breadth, they had the smooth surfaces required by our acceptance, and, according to the writer in the review, gave the impression of a vast field of ice suspended in the atmosphere and suddenly broken into fragments about the size of the palm of the hand. This datum, profoundly of what we used to call the damned, or before we could no longer accept judgment, or cut and dried condemnation by infants, turtles, and lambs, was copied, but without comment, in the Scientific American, 71, 371. Our theology is something like this. Of course we ought to be damned, but we revolt against adjudication by infants, turtles, and lambs. So now come to some remarkable data in a rather difficult department of supergeography. Vast fields of aerial ice. There's a lesson to me in the treachery of the imaginable. Most of our opposition is in the clearness with which the conventional, but impossible, becomes the imaginable, and then the resistant to modifications. After it had become the conventional with me, I conceived clearly of vast sheets of ice, a few miles above this earth, then the shining of the sun, and the ice partly melting, that note upon the ice that fell at Derby, water trickling and forming icicles upon the lower surface of the ice sheet. I seemed to look up and so clearly visualized those icicles, hanging like stalactites from a flat-roofed cave in white calcite. Or I looked up at the underside of an aerial ice lump and seemed to see a papillation, similar to that observed by a calf at times. But then, if icicles should form upon the underside of a sheet of aerial ice, that would be by the falling of water toward this earth. An icicle is of course an expression of gravitation, and if water melting from ice should fall toward this earth, why not the ice itself fall before an icicle could have time to form? Of course, in quasi-existence, where everything is a paradox, one might argue that the water falls but the ice does not, because the ice is heavier, that is, in masses. That notion, I think, belongs in a more advanced course than we are taking at present. Our expression upon icicles. A vast field of aerial ice. It is inert to this earth's gravitation, but by universal flux and variation, part of it sags closer to this earth, and is susceptible to gravitation. By cohesion with the main mass, this part does not fall, but water melting from it does fall and forms icicles. Then, by various disturbances, this part sometimes falls in fragments that are protrusive with icicles. Of the ice that fell, some of it enclosing living frogs at Dubuque, Iowa, June 16, 1882, it is said, Monthly Weather Review, June 1882, that there were pieces from 1 to 17 inches in circumference, the largest weighing 1 pound and 3/4, that upon some of them were icicles half an inch in length. We emphasize that these objects were not hailstones. The only merger is that of knobby hailstones, or of large hailstones, with protuberances wrought by crystallization. But that is no merger with terrestrial phenomena, and such formations are unaccountable to orthodoxy, or it is incredible that hail could so crystallize, not forming by accretion, in the fall of a few seconds. For an account of such hailstones, see Nature, 61, 594. Note the size, some of them the size of turkeys' eggs. It is our expression that sometimes the icicles themselves have fallen, as if by concussion, or as if something had swept against the underside of an aerial ice floe, detaching its papillations. Monthly Weather Review, June, 1889. That, at Oswego, New York, June 11th, 1889, according to the Turin, New York, Leader, there fell, in a thunderstorm, pieces of ice that resembled the fragments of icicles. Monthly Weather Review, 29/506. That, on Florence Island, St. Lawrence River, August 8, 1901, with ordinary hail, fell pieces of ice formed like icicles, the size and shape of lead pencils that had been cut into sections about 3/8 of an inch in length. So our data of the Super Sargasso Sea and its Arctic region, and, for weeks at a time, an ice field may hang motionless over a part of this earth's surface. The sun has some effect upon it, but not much until late in the afternoon, I should say. Part of it has sagged, but is held up by cohesion with the main mass, whereupon we have such an occurrence, as would have been a little uncanny to us once upon a time, or fall of water from a cloudless sky, day after day, in one small part of this earth's surface, late in the afternoon, when the sun's rays had had time for their effects. Monthly Weather Review, October, 1886. That, according to the Charlotte Chronicle, October 21st, 1886, for 3 weeks there had been a fall of water from the sky in Charlotte, North Carolina, localized in one particular spot, every afternoon about 3 o'clock, that, whether the sky was cloudy or cloudless, the water or rain fell upon a small patch of land between 2 trees, and nowhere else. This is the newspaper account, and, as such, it seems in the depths of the unchosen, either by me or any other expression of the Salvation Army. The account by the Signal Service observer at Charlotte, published in the Review, follows: an unusual phenomenon was witnessed on the 21st, having been informed that for some weeks prior to date rain had been falling daily after 3 p.m. on a particular spot near 2 trees, corner of 9th and D Streets. I visited the place and saw precipitation in the form of raindrops at 4:47 and 4:55 p.m., while the sun was shining brightly. On the 22nd, I again visited the place, and from 4:05 to 4:25 p.m., a light shower of rain fell from a cloudless sky. Sometimes the precipitation falls over an area of half an acre, but always appears to center at these 2 trees, and when lightest occurs there only.